Imagine the most feared military genius of the 19th century, a man whose very name made kings tremble and empires collapse. Now, strip away the iconic bicorn hat. Strip away the gold-braided uniform, the medals, and the sword. Picture him completely, stark naked. Not in the privacy of his bedroom, but in the middle of dictating war strategies that would send hundreds of thousands of men to their deaths. Sounds like a bizarre myth, right? Or perhaps a twisted piece of British propaganda? For centuries, historians have quietly ignored the whispers of the naked emperor. We prefer our historical figures neatly packaged in oil paintings, looking stoic and heroic. But behind closed doors, hidden deep in the personal diaries of his closest servants, lies a reality so strange and so psychologically intense that it fundamentally changes how we understand Napoleon Bonaparte. So, did the Emperor of France actually conquer Europe in the nude? The answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's a dark dive into extreme stress, bizarre biological coping mechanisms, and a scalding hot secret that literally fueled his genius. And to understand it, we have to start with a lie. The year is 1803. England is terrified. Across the Channel, Napoleon is amassing an army, and the British public needs a reason to mock the man they fear so deeply. Enter the British press. Political cartoonists like James Gilray began depicting the French emperor as Little Boney, a diminutive, temperamental toddler throwing tantrums. But alongside these cartoons, a strange rumor began circulating in the diplomatic underground. Spies and foreign dignitaries returning from Paris whispered that the Emperor of the French was losing his mind. They claimed he had abandoned all royal etiquette. There were reports of diplomats walking into his private quarters for crucial meetings, only to find Napoleon pacing the room like a caged animal, shedding layers of clothing as his mind raced, completely unbothered by his lack of attire. To the rigid, deeply conservative royal courts of Europe, this was scandalous. A monarch must always be presented with dignity, but Napoleon wasn't a traditional monarch. He was an artillery officer who crowned himself. He viewed the elaborate silk robes and heavy military uniforms not as symbols of his power, but as suffocating costumes for the public. When the heavy oak doors of his private chambers closed, the emperor vanished, and the hyper-obsessive man took over. The rumors of his partial nudity weren't signs of madness. They were the actions of a brain moving so fast that physical comfort became a secondary, almost irrelevant concern. But as the rumor mill churned across the English Channel, exaggerating his habits into total lunacy, the actual truth in Paris was far more structured and infinitely more bizarre. Because the real story of Napoleon's unconventional ruling style didn't happen while he was pacing a grand throne room. It happened in a tub of nearly boiling water. This is where the myth meets the documented, undeniable truth. Napoleon Bonaparte didn't just take baths, he weaponized them. While other monarchs of his era held court in lavishly decorated halls, sitting on gilded thrones, Napoleon turned his bathroom into the ultimate, undisputed command center of the French Empire. According to the meticulously kept diaries of Louis Marchand, his most trusted head valet, the emperor would spend 2, sometimes up to 3 hours a day, completely submerged in water. But this wasn't a relaxing spa day. Napoleon demanded the water be kept at a temperature that would literally blister the skin of a normal human being. He was obsessed with the heat. Marchand's primary job during these hours was to stand by with buckets of boiling water, constantly topping off the copper tub the moment the temperature dropped by even a fraction of a degree. Napoleon would frequently scream, "More hot water! Turn on the hot tap!" until the room was completely engulfed in a thick, blinding steam. Now picture this scene. It's absolute chaos. The room is a sauna. Napoleon is submerged up to his neck, essentially naked, hidden only by the murky, steaming water. But he is not alone. Surrounding this boiling tub are his top generals, his trembling ministers, and his exhausted secretaries. They are sweating profusely through their heavy wool uniforms, gasping for air in the suffocating heat, frantically scribbling down his rapid-fire orders. From this bathtub, completely stripped of his imperial armor, Napoleon dictated foreign policy. He mapped out the disastrous invasion of Russia. He restructured the entire French economy and drafted the Napoleonic Code, a legal system still used across the world today. If a minister hesitated or gave a foolish answer, the naked emperor was known to violently splash them with boiling water in sheer frustration. This wasn't just a quirk, this was his primary workspace. For the master of Europe, the bathtub was his true throne. But the obvious question is, why? Why would the most powerful man on the planet choose to rule his vast empire while naked and boiling alive in a copper tub? It had absolutely nothing to do with hygiene. It was a matter of survival. The human body is not built to carry the cognitive weight of an entire continent, and what that scalding hot water was actually doing to Napoleon's brain waves and his nervous system is something modern science is only just beginning to understand. To understand why the Emperor of France practically lived in a boiling cauldron, we have to look at his brain and the catastrophic physical condition of his body. Modern neuropsychology tells us a lot about the states of flow and sensory regulation. Napoleon was processing an unfathomable amount of information every single day. He was micromanaging troop movements in Spain, negotiating treaties with Russia, and rewriting the laws of France simultaneously. His brain was in a constant state of hyper-arousal, bombarded by thousands of data points and relentless pressure. The extreme heat of the water acted as a violent, physical override to his nervous system. By submerging himself in water so hot it bordered on painful, he was forcing his body to focus on a singular, intense physical sensation. This extreme thermal therapy effectively muted the chaotic noise of the world outside the bathroom doors. It induced a forced state of deep concentration. In that scalding tub, the emperor wasn't distracted by the itch of his uniform, the cold of the palace, or the whispers of his court. There was only the heat and his brilliant, terrifying mind. But there was another, far darker biological reason for this bizarre habit. A secret his doctors desperately tried to hide from the public. Napoleon's body was literally breaking down. During his early military campaigns, specifically the Siege of Toulon, a young Napoleon contracted a severe form of scabies, a highly contagious skin infestation that caused agonizing, relentless itching. Medical records from his personal physicians reveal that this condition plagued him for decades, flaring up violently during times of extreme stress. Furthermore, he suffered from severe, chronic hemorrhoids and an inflamed bladder condition called dysuria, which made simple acts like sitting on a horse or a throne excruciatingly painful. The boiling baths weren't a luxurious indulgence. They were a desperately needed medical intervention. The intense heat was the only thing that soothed his raw, diseased skin, relaxed his agonizing muscle spasms, and allowed him to find enough physical relief to actually think. When foreign diplomats reported seeing a frantic, partially naked man, they weren't seeing a madman. They were seeing a biological machine pushed beyond human limits, desperately trying to keep itself from shattering seam. If you want to know the true nature of a man, don't ask his generals, ask his wife, and ask his servants. Empress Josephine, the great love of his life, was deeply disturbed by his obsession. In her private correspondence, she lamented the state of his skin, noting how the constant exposure to boiling water left him looking raw, red, and physically depleted. She begged him to reduce the temperature, warning him that he was literally cooking his own vitality away. He completely ignored her. But perhaps the most fascinating accounts come from his valets, the men who actually stood in the steam with him. Constant Wary, his chief valet for over a decade, painted a picture of incredible contrast. Constant wrote about the sheer cognitive dissonance of watching the most feared man on earth, the conqueror who made the Tsar of Russia bow, sitting naked, vulnerable, and soaking wet in a small metal tub. Yet, even completely stripped of his imperial majesty, Napoleon projected an aura of absolute terror. Imagine being a top-ranking general, adorned in your finest military regalia, chest puffed out with medals, standing at attention in a sweltering, steam-filled bathroom. You are sweating profusely, struggling to breathe, while a naked man submerged in water coldly dictates a strategy that will dictate the fate of 1,000,000 soldiers. You would think the emperor would look ridiculous, but according to his inner circle, His piercing gaze and the terrifying speed of his intellect made them completely forget he was naked. The sheer force of his personality overrode his lack of clothing. So, did Emperor Napoleon ever go naked? The British propagandists wanted the world to picture a lunatic running naked through the halls of the Louvre, throwing tantrums. History books want you to picture a stoic god of war, forever frozen in a pristine uniform, hand tucked neatly into his coat. But the truth, hidden in the suffocating steam of his private bathroom, is far more compelling. Napoleon Bonaparte ruled half the known world while sitting completely naked in a tub of boiling water. Not because he was insane, but because his mind was too fast and his body was too broken to survive any other way. The scalding water was his armor. The bathtub was his true command center. It forces us to ask, how many other legends of history are built on meticulously crafted lies, while the bizarre, messy, and deeply human truth remains hidden behind closed doors? If this deep dive into the weird, hidden history of the world changed the way you look at the past, hit that subscribe button right now. We uncover the dark, forgotten truths of history every single week. And before you go, drop a comment below. If you were an emperor, what bizarre habit would you use to handle the stress of ruling the world? Let's talk about it down in the comments.